Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Institute for Australian Asian Arts and Culture, RAC, at Western Sydney University. My name is Zijing Han. I'm the director of RAC. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of a barometrical people of Darug Nation, whose ancestors are the traditional owners of their land for thousands of years, and pay my respect to First Nations elders, past and present. Warmly welcome to RAC Writers in Conversation series in collaboration with the Writing and Society Research Centre at Western Sydney University. We are beyond thrilled to have the winner of 2025 Miles Franklin Award, Siang Lu, in this episode, the finale of our 2025 series. As we all know, Siang Lu won Australia's most prestigious literary award with his monumental book, Ghost Cities, which is hailed as a genuine landmark in Australian literature. It cleverly draws on Chinese history to explore the absurdity of modern life and work. The book's intricate, multi-layered narratives are inventive, daring, and thrilling, engaging the reader's mind and heart. Siang Lu's storytelling is both beguiling and deeply rewarding to readers. Siang Lu also published his other brilliant book, The Whitewash, a scathing, hilarious satire of Asian representation or lack of representation in the film industry and of race and racism. It tells a story one rarely found in Australian fiction. I don't mean to box you, Siang Lu, but nonetheless, you've made history by being the first Australian writer of Chinese heritage to win the Miles Franklin Award. So you can imagine how crowded Siang Lu's schedule has been. I can't be grateful to Siang Lu for squeezing our conversation in his crazy schedule. So after my conversation with Siang Lu, who says I can ask any questions, and he doesn't know my questions beforehand. So after my conversation with Siang Lu, our writing students will ask Siang Lu their questions. We have 3 with us today, and followed by questions from the audience. Please warmly welcome Siang Lu to RAC Writers in Conversation.
Thank
Siang Lu, I
you.
can't tell you how much I enjoyed reading and rereading your books. I've read novels in English and in Chinese, loads of them, and I'm a professional subtitler and a literary translator specializing in intricacies of languages and cultures. And I have never enjoyed reading books in English about Chinese culture and language as much as I have enjoyed yours. I feel that I'm finally reading our own books, not others' books, not in any narrow sense that you wrote about Chinese culture and language, but the way you write and the stories you tell instantly click with me and with many people like me, and I get them. When I interviewed Melissa Lukashenko about her Miles Franklin winning book, Too Much Lip, which I translated into Chinese, she said to me that different readers of the book would get the story on different levels. That is, general readers would get the story, Australian readers who deeply understand Australian history, they get their story, and Australians who are writers themselves who get their story. Ultimately, it is the Indigenous readers who would get their story in full and on the deepest level. So when I was reading your books, I understood what Melissa meant. That realization gives us such a joy. So I have many questions and I hope we can cover many of them. So you can answer briefly if you like or quickly, but there are quite a number of questions. Question 1, what has changed since you received the Miles Franklin Award?
It's a hard question to start with. What has changed? I mean, a lot and nothing. It depends on what you look at. Um, as far as the nothing part, people, well, maybe let's start with the a lot part, which is my life doesn't look anything like it used to. And I'm quite often governed by just an insane calendar. I was late to our last meeting, and regretfully, it was a test for this one. Um, it was the only time I'd missed an appointment in the entire year, so unfortunately, had to be you. Um, and so, on a practical level, really a lot has changed. Um, and it's a complex question to answer because in the months and the weeks and the days after having won the award, people would ask, and everyone's curious, what is it like having won an award? And or how are you is really the question, but it's a big and expansive question. And I quickly learned that the correct answer was to say good, even if I wasn't feeling good. And it was a tricky thing to navigate because I didn't have the words to figure out what the not good part of it was. Everyone reminds you that your life has changed and the book has a new platform, and it is wonderful. But if you're a shy person like me, extraordinarily introverted and introspective, who does not like making plans, in fact, like staying at home, then you'll look at a calendar like the one the second half of my year has been like, and there'll just be unbridled panic, every single day, pretty much. So I mean, that all comes with the territory, and it's a wonderful sort of territory to be on, really. So the correct answer is still the correct answer, which is good. It's just there's a big asterisk next to it that says, "Do you have an hour for me to explain how things are complicated?" Um, but as far as the part that has not changed at all, I remember thinking to myself, making myself a promise that regardless of what I write in the future, and taking into account the fact that, yes, having won an award like this actually opens up more doors and more possibilities at the same time that it actually closes a few. I'm talking about pure books here, the theoretical books that we dream of writing, the ones that we have like in our head and sort of just dream of every day. Some of them can no longer be written for reasons I won't get into, and then others sort of exist newly. But and setting that to the one side, the promise that I made to myself was that I should continue writing as though from the parallel universe in which I had not won the Miles Franklin, because I think the art would be better.
I love your answer. And there is a Chinese saying you may also know one's personality is reflected in one's writing style. I can see that, you are quite genuine and quite clever and quite subversive. Even your answer reflect that. It's really interesting. I enjoy it. So second question, when you received the news, obviously, and you virtually went to shell shock. And had it never occurred to you that you would win the Miles Franklin Award? And why not?
It mathematically it made sense to look at it and say, okay, there's a 1 in 6 chance or whatever the short list is. And of course, from the long list, you can do the same thing, the same exercise. But it never once occurred to me that I might win it. And I think that's more or less a self-protective mechanism. It's not to say that I don't think the work is good. That's a different sort of question and a different set of, interrogations, self-interrogations. Is there a limit to not your talent, but your desire to sort of pursue it to the ends? When it comes to actually embracing success or anticipating it, I've found up until very recently that it hasn't really been useful for me, just my mental health. I remember there being, I mean, I don't even know how much media there has been about the Miles Franklin, and obviously some months on, it has since sort of uh, gotten to a better place for me, less overwhelming. But certainly there was a feeling of kind of being snowed under and avalanched out by all of these media outlets. And again, all of which I'm saying is a good thing. It's also just complicated. And I didn't read a single piece of media about myself because for the same reasons, which is I don't know how this would help me in any practical sense. Obviously, there are the endorphins of, you know, people think you're important, you've done something, and surely that's sort of exciting. But I guess I've learned that over the course of being a debut author, The Whitewash was published in 2022, and not knowing what an author was, not knowing how to be an author, as I mentioned, I'm quite introverted. Um, Nonetheless, wanting to succeed or at least do the right things, not get in my own way. Um, I was sort of building an incomplete map of what it was to be an author or a public person. I wasn't on social media back then. This is for the whitewash. And I'd go into bookstores and I'd sort of find my book and I'd offer to sign the book because this is what I'd heard that other authors did. And I hated it. Like I hated doing it. I hated announcing myself. I hated being an imposition on other people. And there was just a disconnect between what I was experiencing and what I was not being told, but what I was witnessing, what the author experience should be. And I don't regret doing these things because I think that you have to be bold in your action. And then once you figure out it's not for you, then you can sort of put that to the side. But this is pretty similar to what I'm about to say, which is I wasn't getting the right endorphins from it. It just wasn't making me feel good. And so this was probably a good self-protective mechanism that allowed me to instinctively know once the media had sort of come out with all these articles that I should just not read them. Having said that, my wife did read them and she sent them. She didn't send them along to me, but she would sort of give me the gist of things. And you know, I have rambled and gone on mute and then rambled again. I've actually forgotten your question, so can you please give me a prompt? And I
I
believe,
love your answer. It's just so often, it's always a surprise to me, but in all the right way, it's just so clever. Anyway, so it's just your wife read all those articles just reminds me of a taster's taster. So you
yeah,
have someone
exactly.
to taste it first. Yeah, yeah, my next question is really enjoy your answer. And you touch on this introvert and shy, which you talked about. I'm just wondering, because I can see that, and I also can see, I wonder whether there is link. The link, what I mean is, um, because of you're so introvert and such a shy person, and that is why you have this incredible, widely imaginative and inventive creative mind as a way of what you would call literary revenge.
Hmm. Do you mean literary revenge
Literary
against?
revenge, not in a a spiteful, meanful way. It's just
Hmm.
revenge in a way that whatever you don't do in the actual world, you have them. You
Yeah,
have the freedom to create your own literal world, which you enjoy so
that's actually a
freely.
really wonderful way to put it. Um, I suppose in some ways you're absolutely correct. I wouldn't quite frame it as literary revenge, but rather that part of the reason why um, it wouldn't be my first port of call to appear on a Zoom, for example, this is wonderful, I will say, and on the stage, giving a keynote or being in conversation or being part of a panel, none of which are really my natural state. Writing is my natural state. And it's pretty similar to what you've said, but I think the key difference being, um, and before I get to the difference, I think the connecting tissue here is a sense of perfectionism, um, is that I rather like being an editor. I noticed not too long ago that I seem to be an editor in all forms. I mean, not just of writing and my own writing, um, but and quite glibly on Instagram. Photoshop is one, video editing, and all sorts of other things, audio. Like I've got a background in radio, and I think one of the things that drew me to radio, setting aside the live element, was this idea that you could perfect the form, right? Like no matter how unpolished you were, no matter how many takes you took, you could eventually stitch together the perfect sentence, right? And that's the same mindset that's drawn me to this editorial mindset, not just in, Photoshop and video and radio, but particularly with the written word. And it's a kind of a contentious, lifelong, career-long struggle. And I am going to tell another long story, which is that when I was failing out of law school in my undergraduate university degree, the cliff notes to this is that I was studying journalism and law as a dual degree and was much more passionate about the journalism, having discovered radio and editing, and not so much with the law. And had kind of submitted a law assignment that was just very sort of self-indulgent and self-destructive, which was it wasn't the assignment at all. It was just a short story about the assignment. And I regret, you know, the youthful folly that led to this, although it's interesting to talk about it because that represents the me that was. Anyway, I received a phone call from the dean of the law school, and he was a very nice guy. He rang me and told me very kindly that he had to fail me. And, I was 19, and I said that was more or less the point. Um, and I guess this what I mean about like the maturity is that if I was slightly more mature, I would have just dropped out of uni, right? Dropped out of law school. I just didn't really have that maturity then. But it led to this really wonderful conversation between me and him, where, unbeknownst to me, he had a son who was about my age, and I was struggling with a few things, with my dad. We weren't seeing eye to eye, hence me sort of trying to self-sabotage. And we actually ended up having a really heartfelt conversation, and I think about it all the time, actually. And the reason why I think about it is that we got onto such number of topics and spoke so discursively that eventually, somehow, we got on the topic of him asking me the question, who do you think will inherit the world? Do you think it will be the writers, or do you think it will be the orators, the speakers? And I understand why he asked this question. I was talking about being passionate about writing. I think he was coming at it from his experience as a legal professional, probably was a barrister. And, of course, I picked the writers, and he picked the orators. And the reason why I think about this all the time is because despite my best intentions at being the former, I've now become the latter. I'm now on Zoom talking to you and expressing my thoughts. And it's a different and more tricky medium because I don't have the benefit of the distance between the page and publication. It's just me, right? And so whatever silly thing is going to come out of my mouth is just going to be recorded and live on forever, which is its own anxiety. Um, but I do thank him. I thank him for sort of opening that door for me and keeping it ajar, and letting me, look, it's not going to be a surprise to you to hear that my first year or so as having been a published author, and by which I mean a public person, was, I mean, horrible. Like it was really bad because I didn't know how to do it. I didn't want to do it. And thinking about him and this conversation actually made me realize that there is something to embrace about it, which is that it's maybe a superpower. If you don't want to be here and you have to be here, then what are you going to talk about? You better talk about the thing that means the most to you, that you are passionate about. And, hopefully that will translate and mean something to someone.
John, you express yourself so well. It's incredible. You are both a writer and orator. It tells a lot about who you are, actually, each piece of your answer. And so this is also, my next question is also related. I call you a master of satire. So it's incredible you have this ability. And nothing is spared in your like X-ray scan. You see through and so well. And then you have this satirical rendition of whatever comes in your way. I'm just even you answering my questions. And then you have this hilarious humor and superb wit. Um, when did you discover you have this talent, very satirical talent, and then your exceptional ability to subvert what is apparent and or what is taken for granted? Also, in relation to that, did you consciously cultivate this talent as your writing style?
People have
One
asked
and a
me
half. Yeah.
one and a
So
half questions, right?
yeah.
I'll answer both at the same
Mm,
time,
mm,
which is that people have asked me the first part, but they haven't asked
mm.
me the second part ever, really. Um, and it's, yes, I mean, I cultivated it. But that makes it sound more strategic and intentional than it really was. And sort of connected back to my previous answer to you, you'll find the more I talk, the more everything is connected, which I don't necessarily think is a good thing. Um, but I remember that I remember being asked on stage, and the tricky thing about, again, not wanting to be on stage, but sort of committing fully to the moment is that, and again, being on a lot of stages, and that is a good thing. With the asterisk, it's complicated. Um, is that you will sometimes, I mean, in fact, quite often learn a lot about yourself from the mouth that moves and thinks for you. And it's a bit frightening, right? Because I don't know exactly what I'm going to tell you right now. I have no idea where this conversation is going to lead. And having pursued this spirit in the past, I won't say it has gotten me into trouble. In fact, quite the opposite. It has been quite a gift to somehow unexpectedly discover the thing about yourself that you hadn't really ever known. So this is that, which is someone asked me on stage if no, they said that the two books, but particularly the whitewash, were angry books. And I remember being in the very middle of trying to vociferously deny this assertion and then realizing before even a word got out that, yeah, they are angry books. And that in itself was, you know, sort of an epiphany, but also something, months disconnected from that conversation, another one on stage where I learned about myself because my mouth said it for me. Um, that the sense of humor, which I have tried to cultivate and is been something that I guess since I was young, I've really just gravitated towards comedy. Um, but I did not know this about myself. I knew it was an interest, but I didn't not know this about myself, which was that the mouth said um, that it was a self-defense mechanism, and it is. And the next natural question is, what are you defending? And I don't know. It's everything, right? But by now, it's kind of a self-reflexive thing, which is I'm always reaching for the joke. It's always the easiest thing, actually, for me to do. And perhaps, the more you get to know writers, the more you'll hear that this is somehow humor, sense of humor, or joke telling, or constructing a good joke is somehow the hard thing in writing. And I don't necessarily feel that, but I guess that's because outside of the writing, that's something that I'm always just trying to do, right? And it's a wonder, but it's also a gift that I've been able to marry the two together. You probably will like this. This is a bit discursive, but I will say that, and we can get into this later. I'm sure there will be questions about this. But just quickly touching on the fact that Ghost Cities was the first book that could not get published, and The Whitewash was the second that became the first. The secret heart of The Whitewash, or the challenge of it, that little mountain, because I think we were talking about mountains last week, and like the just this dumb impulse to scale the mountain that nobody cares about, is really what drives me. Um, the challenge with the whitewash was, in fact, to write a book attacking my own vanity. So I don't mean that to say my vanity as a physical person in the world, but having written a book like Go Cities, which, um, is probably more my natural style, just in terms of prose style. I wanted to sort of challenge myself and say, okay, well, then you think that you're the best at this thing, or you're proud of this thing, which is prose writing, then can you write a book with no prose? So that's kind of where a lot of the impulses come from, is just an imagined challenge. Is this in fact even possible? And the reason why I bring this up is I was going to say, I can't ever imagine not writing a book that doesn't combine, the things that I'm interested in literarily and also comedically. But I think that may in fact be like the final bastion for me, is to look at humor in the same way and say, is this a crutch? Does it have to be in every book? Big part of me would answer yes, but there is the challenge there. I can see the mountain. I just don't want to acknowledge it right now.
Each of your answers is very illuminating about your books. I feel like I know instantly when I hear you and I click with what I've read in your books. It's, shed a lot of light on that. Yes, you touch on the order of the sequence of the Ghost, the City, and the Whitewash. This is the question that I want to ask. Because you wrote Ghost City first, actually, and then you just keep receiving rejections, 200 and all sorts. In the process of receiving rejections, you wrote and published the Whitewash. So strictly speaking, Whitewash is actually the second book in terms of writing. The reason why I bring this up is it possibility, or is that true? Like, because Ghost Cities was rejected, keep being kept rejecting. So you are writing a new novel, a next novel, which with abandon. Like, I don't care. The first book was rejected. I just write the book the way I like. Because I feel when I'm reading The Whitewash, I feel that's the way I'm. I mean, not that I like it, The Whitewash better, but I truly enjoy Whitewash. I feel like you just so freely. One word about your writing is fearless, and then the whitewash. It's so give me that one word, the word. So is that sequence has the order or wrong order make has a different impact on the whitewash, the writing?
Uh, a little bit, but it's a bit more circuitous than you present it, which is, what's the best way for me to put this? I was swinging freely, both with Ghost Cities and with the Whitewash. And I think I should say at the outset that, I'm extraordinarily grateful that this was the sequence that the books took. And if there was some other Zoom Siang Lu from 2024 who could join this, having not won any Miles Franklin, he'd tell you the same, which is that Ghost Cities is a tough book to pitch. It's a strange book to imagine in market. And it's a key part of publishing. It doesn't necessarily need to be a key part of creative writing. If you're a writer who wants to write the thing that means something to you, then go ahead and write that. If you want that, everything that I said, plus publication, then it becomes a little more complicated and you need to look at a few more things more expansively. And I guess just to quickly stay on this topic for a second more, which is that without the failure of ghost cities, the whitewash would not exist.
Mhm.
So if 10 years ago the book had been picked up for publication,
Mhm.
that completely erases the timeline and make it sound like this is a time travel story, but it completely erases any pathway to thinking that I had that I must write the whitewash. And this book is very dear to me. So whatever universe in which I've written both the whitewash and ghost cities, and by the way, the whitewash with its sort of modest success was really, and the skills that I'd learned in the last 10 years of really figuring out what the industry was and also just becoming a more mature person who knows exactly what they want and can build the tools to actually go and get that thing, allowed Ghost Cities to be published. And so it's a very kind of connected sequence of events. The two books don't really exist without each other.
Mhm.
Um, but when it comes to swinging freely, I remember agreeing very much vociferously with you a week ago when we sort of almost touched on this topic. And that is true from the artistic standpoint. But like I was saying to the hypothetical people on the Zoom who might have an eye towards publishing, it becomes tricky too and kind of weighted with pressure at the same time. Um, so it's a difficult paradox to embrace, really, because I was swinging freely with the whitewash. At the same time, I was represented in the United States by a literary agent who, for 6 years, we had not been able to publish a book. And by the way, there is a third book in between Ghost Cities and the whitewash, which did not make it to market and was in fact rejected by this agent. So we won't spend any time talking about that book. But there comes an accumulated pressure, nonetheless, when you are represented by a literary agent and you're expecting now that both of you, in fact, the only reason that you're in partnership together is in order to publish a book. And so there is that pressure to publish the book. Uh, Having said that, I think I'm lucky in the sense that artistically, I've only ever wanted it to be my way. And again, one of those unexpected things that come out of the mouth. I remember being at Port Fairy Literary Festival and getting very psyched out while I was on stage because Helen Garner had just walked into the audience. Um, and I remember saying, amongst other things, which I now cringe at and regret, um, that there's never really a convenient time to discover that you have artistic principles, and that you have to stand by them. So it might sound like a sob story for me to sit here and say that, the parting of ways with that literary agent after a period of 6 years, having produced no published output, three manuscripts over that period, that sounds objectively terrible. And in fact, it was. But it was also a gift, which is that, and you have to look at the very thin silver lining of the cloud. But if you make it through an experience like that and you're still writing, then you know who you are artistically. And that's never going to change.
Mhm.
In terms of publishing the books, that might make it a little harder. But I tend to think without exaggeration that that's sort of a treasure that one discovers and keeps forever.
brilliant answers, so such a good answers. And explain, we really be very grateful for the ghost cities being rejected. Otherwise, we would not have the whitewash. And I'm really looking forward to the third one that I haven't written. It's not out yet. I imagine it will be really, really brilliant. And you are very unique. And even the way you answer your questions are quite unique, but so logical, so logical. It's really good. Anyway, so lots of people have talked about the two Chinas or two cities, in this in your book, The Ghost Cities. So I won't talk more about that, but I would like to touch on the just very technical question. I just yeah. Okay, so this is a very technical question. So did you write to the impure city, imagine impure city, in one go, and then portmanteau separately, and then intersect them, or you write while intersectively?
I think this is going to make everyone mad, but I wrote everything as it came to me, with no real chronology. Um, and I guess that's beyond being easily bored. I really mean that. There would be days where I just didn't feel like continuing, say, the story of the mountain. I would just kind of flip to some part of the book yet to be written that more appealed to me. And of course, with the sense that everything was connected, but not necessarily knowing how or why. Um, and I guess I have a habit of saying that things are a gift, but I really do mean that. Um, it's similar to the previous question when I looked back on, the youthful folly of that younger Siang who sort of self-sabotaged. And I think of this writer who wrote this book, uh, as you say, swinging freely. And I also look at that as a particular sort of youthful folly, um, challenged again to write Ghost Cities in a parallel universe in which it did not first exist, being the writer that I am now at the age that I am now, with much more time pressures, with two children. Um, I wouldn't write the same book, and maybe it would be a lesser book. So again, that's the gift. Um, I suppose you could say that at the time of writing, when it comes to the hypothetical common question of are you a pantser or a plotter, I'm 100% a pantser. And that remains my heart, really. And this is very personal to every writer. Um, you're drawn to the page for different reasons, and you stay on the page for different reasons as well. Um, But to me, I think the key thing that I want to know is a joy of discovery. So even if the current iteration of my writing practice involves more plotting than before, but certainly way more pantsing, it's still with all the plotting part is just a delivery mechanism. It's a way for me to get the thing done. And the stuff that's really the joy to me is finding out that something is connected that I didn't previously know was, or intending a connection that works in exactly the way that I had hoped on the page. So those things will never stop being kind of the lodestar for me, and I'll always pursue them no matter what book I write.
See this in the ghost city, and either the imperial city or the mental portmanteau acting and actual city, and as well as the bad Chinese in the Sydney part. All these three narratives. It's just a field. I read the field of parodies and absurdities. And then those absurdities so reminds me, because they're so brilliant, so reminds me of a Kafka. Did Kafka influence you? And also, did you study Chinese history?
The more you talk to me, the more you realize that I know almost nothing about Chinese history, so I hate to disappoint. Um, and it's a different answer that I'll give to a Western interviewer because inevitably, not always, in fact, I've had conversations with Linda Javen, who's, I mean, just, an expert in China, but primarily when you're on the radio or the TV or on, in a feature, whoever is talking to you, you could sort of just make it up and say you did a ton of research into Chinese history. The fact is, I felt like it was this is going to sound very sort of self-indulgent. Um, I felt that it was almost my blood prerogative to write whatever I wanted about my ethnicity and my culture without being completely led by, suppose this is where I potentially end up sounding like Trump, but like being led not by fact, but more sort of my gut feelings, right? Like how do I feel as an Asian living in this world? How do I feel as as an Asian Australian living in this world? How do I feel about the fact that my hyphens are Chinese Australian when in fact I was born in Malaysia and have made a conscious decision because it is too much in a bio to add another hyphen, Chinese, Malaysian, Australian. And so there's this kind of, when you grow up in the diaspora, there these are all the things you're thinking about, whether they're forefront of the brain or not, because the child brain, well, I can only really speak for myself, but is not thinking about that. You're just thinking about survival. You're wanting to fit in, you're wanting to be like other kids. And in fact, you're hating the part of yourself that is different. And that's a shame because it takes some years to recognize that the part of yourself that is different is the part you must embrace.
Also, in relation to that, it's really about the Bad Chinese, and the Bad Chinese. Everyone loves that story. It's really about the being a culture shaming, and almost everyone who is a migrant in this country probably can relate to it on this hilarious part. But I also read it in a deeper level because in the end, you really turned this Bad Chinese into a rebellion against culture shame, and with ironic victory in the sense that you ultimately write this book very unapologetically bicultural and bilingual, despite that you claim you're monolingual. But I see this, I sense the understanding or observation you have is actually quite brilliant. So my question is quite concrete. This question, because several places that you use the Chinese in this book more directly than in the whitewash, interestingly. And some of them you don't translate, some of them you leave it. And like for example, when character Siang Lu went to see this Chinese doctor for being sick, and then the Chinese doctor said, 哪儿不舒服啊? In Chinese. I laughed instantly because that's so Chinese, so spot on. That's it's just so typical. And then obviously, non-Chinese speakers, they recognize as the character recognized, said, oh, I don't speak Chinese. So what they get is this person doesn't speak Chinese. So this doctor straight away said Chinese. So that's what they get. But we bilingual get more than that. And so is portmanteau. Portmanteau, it's a pun in the mantou and mantou. It's just when you see the Chinese character, you see the pun, the irony there already. Although with portmanteau, you use this manipulated translation, which I approve, is very clever, saying that bring in empty bun and then people as a filling. So my question is, you consciously make a decision, when to bring more or when to bring less. And obviously there are things that are missed on those people who are not by culture, like by Chinese. How do you make that decision?
I had a way of answering this that I've answered before, so I'll go the other way and surprise myself. But um, last night I was watching the film One Battle After Another, and I was watching it with my wife. We were watching it on streaming. I don't believe it's out. We have an EV pad, which I think many of the people on the Zoom will know about. And I had watched it before, a few weeks before, in a cinema by myself, and really loved it. And sort of said to my wife, "You let's watch this film." And there were parts of the movie where um, Mexican characters are speaking to each other, uh, really significant portions of the film that are untranslated, that remain untranslated. And I should say at the outset that no discerning, reasonable viewer will be lost. If you're paying attention, you'll know what's going on. You don't need the language. Um, but we actually had different experiences because on a streaming service such as this, the film comes with, and you'll probably know this due to your vocation, it comes with the subtitles. And so my wife was watching this film, knowing more about the film than I was in a granular sense. She knew exactly what the Mexican characters were saying to each other, and I didn't. I still had to go by vibes. The thing is, both things can be true and satisfying. And I think part of it has to do with authorial intent. It was Paul Thomas Anderson's authorial intent that these bits of dialogue not be translated. So, in fact, according to the author, the creator, Paul Thomas Anderson in this case, someone like my wife watching this, A, on a streaming service, which is probably not the ideal, but B, in, a subtitled form, is not really receiving the ideal experience that the creator intended. Having said that, it's not the creator's product anymore. And I think the key to it is really just, is it alienating?
Mm.
Or in fact, and it can be
Mm.
if it's intended to alienate, which it wasn't. I'm now talking about my book. Um, or is it more that if you are paying attention, you'll know more or less what the gist is, what's going on, what's being said, what's being communicated? I tend to think, and again, I have to say that, ground zero is the reader's experience, what they get from the book. So once it leaves the author's hands, once it's been printed, it really doesn't matter what I say anymore. So this is just like trivia. Um, but I tend to think that if you're writing scenes in this way with, let's say, another language that goes untranslated, then it is the author's responsibility to make sure that the narrative works without full understanding of the granular detail, but is not alienating. And so that was kind of the balance that I tried to strike, which is ironic. It's ironic because those parts that you recognized as being very spot on culturally, Nalibu Shufu, um, were a result of dialogues that I had with my wife, who is from China and speaks fluently, and I suppose is my first translator of the Chinese portions of the book, where I really relied on her to give me the full verisimilitude of this is how this would be communicated. So if any parts of the Chinese written text of Ghost Cities have appealed to you in any way, then the real author of that is my wife. If you have any compliments, I'll take the English part.
Absolutely great. She is brilliant. She sees a lot, but you also understand. So you waved in your story, and I mean, I think the balance you mentioned is really handled very well. There are still bits that give me, for example, and you talk about discerning readers. It is rewarding to readers who are more discerning than others. Imperial Chef. They have the Dongnan as their name. So when I recognized, I laughed. I thought
Yeah.
that's how clever. It's kind of in disguise, but it's for readers to discover. But then if you're not Chinese, you may not be able to discover that Dongnan is actually east, west, and southwest. So it's
I think
actually
just
quite
at the
funny
risk of
at the
repeating
risk.
myself, it's is this is like, let's say this is a baseline, right?
Yeah,
Where anything below this line has a tendency to alienate.
yeah,
You whatever you insert into the text um ought to, again, I don't want to be too didactic. You can
yeah,
alienate if you want. Really, you can do that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but if your intention is to give a joyful reading experience to the reader, you can only do this. You
yeah,
can't do it this
yeah,
way.
yeah,
So the fact that a typical Western reader is going to come across that paragraph
yeah,
and not recognize that these four chefs are based on North, South, East, West has
yeah,
no bearing on the joy that they experience, unless they're a jerk and later
yeah,
on hear from a
yeah,
Chinese friend who read it
yeah,
that this is some sort of like little nugget and
yeah.
they get offended. I don't know who would do that, but that's the idea is Chinese readers, bilingual readers will get that little bit more, but Western readers are not necessarily going to get
No,
less.
no, that's true. That's true. So my last question before I should bring up the students to ask this question, their questions. So if you can answer this question in a shorter way, but this is a critical question I must ask. In the whitewash, this irony, and I want to use this irony or satire to bring back to you as being a writer. And then you mentioned, dash Chinese, Malaysian, and Australian word more, and Asian, So, and in this whitewash, and there is a series called All American Girl. And this All American Girl is the first US sitcom to feature all Asian cast. So that's your very, very Siang Lu. And then executive told Cho is Chinese, and she plays, and told her that she could not play herself unless she lost weight. And then they said she was too Asian. And then they said she was not Asian enough. And then they even hired a culture consultant to teach her how to be more Asian. You know, Xianglu, that's still you. Anyway, so I would like to take this example to ask you about your views on the role of Asian Australian writer. And you don't want to be boxed as Asian Australian writer, people's expectations of Asian Australian writer.
Hmm.
Can you tell us your views on being Asian Australian writer?
Well, obviously, it means a tremendous amount, um, and it's a responsibility that I take very seriously. And again, it's an individual choice. You could be an Asian Australian writer and not want to be the standard bearer for um, culture, diversity, diaspora. You might, in fact, flinch at that, and that is absolutely your right. The amount of conversations that I've had with fellow diverse and ethnic writers in Australia about writers' festivals that have invited us to the festival to speak on stage, but the only thing we've been invited to speak on is diversity, I mean, we've just had too many conversations. So there's a lot to unpack here. I'll try to keep it brief, which is within the context that it is not for everyone, nor should it be, and that it is a personal choice, I lean into it. You can see that very sort of clearly with the whitewash. And, here I will invoke, um, strangely, Omar El Akkad, who I had the great pleasure to meet with a few weeks ago, a couple of months back now, I think, and we shared a 2 hour long taxi ride back to Melbourne Airport, which was sort of one of the most wonderful experiences of my life. This was just after I had won the award, and I promised to keep this short. Um, he had won the Giller Award, which is Canada's, we came to discover through this long and discursive conversation, was almost exactly the analog of the Mars Franklin in so many ways. And we bonded on a lot of things, including representation, including the weird life that we now live. But the part that I'm going to invoke is when he talks on stage very powerfully about um, actually that this is not bravery, that he is, in his words, I will not say this, I believe he's very brave, but in his words, that he's in fact coming from a place of cowardice. And I really related to this. Maybe not in the way that he'd really intended, but it had something to do with. I'll tell you the honest truth about how the beige index came to be. I know we haven't talked about that. So very quickly for people on the stream who haven't heard of it, it's the we call it the Bechdel test, but for race. And it's look at the top 250 films as voted by popular vote on IMDb. So obviously that comes with its own prejudices because IMDb is a Western data set. Um, and we tried to make like a bushfire style scale of how diverse a film was, hence beige. And tying this back to the first question in introversion, and then now cowardice, which is, and also responsibility, and owning this platform, which is, yes, I do embrace, I accept this role. In fact, I campaigned for it, not to win the Miles Franklin, but to be, in some ways, a spokesperson for more and better Asian representation in the media that it involves mostly film and TV, but also this, what this is that I did not want to talk about myself. I didn't want to go on a Zoom like this and have a Zoom like this and reveal information about myself because I'm very private and shy. And so the first thing my weird introverted brain came up with was I must make this thing called the beige index so that when people ask me about my book and my life, I can actually just re-divert and talk about this other thing. And yes, that there is some cowardice to it, but I came again quickly to discover that it was a gift because while I was hiding behind advocacy that I really cared about. And I was talking about things that really mattered to me.
Great. Each of you answer. I wish we had 2 hours, Siang. Seriously, so much that we need to touch on, but I have to keep my questions to the next time. So let's bring out to students. We have three writing students. We have the Jody, Nicole, and Aisha. Jody, would you like to ask your question first?
Hi, Siang. Thank you so much for your really well considered answers. I think it's blown my questions out of the water because I think you've covered many things that I was going to raise. So I guess my question is not only is it like it's wonderful to see an Asian Australian writing, and like I think for me, when you're walking in those two, like Western and Asian, it's really tricky to find something that you go, oh, this actually resonates. But my question is probably about what will writing look like for you now that you've won the award, you've written your 2 books, like, is it going to change or will you just go back to pre-Miles Franklin in the way you write and develop your work?
That's a really good question. I don't think anyone's really asked it in quite the way that you have. I remember being asked this question, a version of this question. I think the most blunt version of this question is, are you going to quit your day job? And I once answered this, unbeknownst to me, my boss was in the audience. Thankfully, I answered correctly, which was no. Uh, I'm not going to. I don't plan to. And I suppose that might change. It's really hard to say. Um, you sort of live a life, and any adult life is complicated. It has its own responsibilities far outside of literature. I mean, that in some ways is the easiest thing to deprioritize, in fact, although it shouldn't be. Um, and consequently, you end up having to fight for literature. I mean, that sounds very lofty, but is in fact what I think we do every day when we struggle to find the space to actually write. That's a fight for literature, a fight for the thing that like is important. And I spent so long kind of cultivating this in my life that I don't know what I would do without it. Um, and maybe that's a bit of a cop out. Maybe we're just not really in as clear of a space and timeline as I could really kind of look at things and consider. But having recognized that has changed my life, I think it comes back to that commitment, which is just write the thing, the weird thing that only you care about, and write it as compellingly and, with as much verve and humor and art infused into it as possible. And eventually you'll be able to trick someone into publishing it. I guess with the Miles Franklin, that makes the trickery part a little easier.
Great answer. Okay, thank you so much. And thank you, Jody. Nicole, can we have you to ask your question to Siang Lu?
Yeah.
Hello,
Hi,
Nicole.
how are we?
It's not the first time we've met.
Now, I believe you like quirky. So my question or questions are in the form of a very quick game, and I hope you will play. So I have 5 quick questions where you could answer with either some, none, or vital. Is that something you can do? Yay. All right. 1. Of how much importance is it to reread yesterday's pages before writing today's?
Some.
Some. Of how much importance is it for you to maintain a social media presence?
What are the terms of some, none, and vital? So when I say none, I'm really saying that it is
what are
not,
the
in
3
fact,
choices? Yeah, ABC.
It's not important if you say none.
I will say none.
None, great. Of how much importance is it for you to read your prose aloud as part of editing?
Vital.
Vital. Of how much importance are T.S. Eliot's words in your practice? Good writers borrow, great writers steal.
Vital.
Vital. And of how much importance is it to write in cafes?
Some.
Yay, thank you. That's my questions and my
Thank you,
game.
Nicole.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for these very fun, quirky questions and quite revealing, actually. It's a good one, Nicole. Aisha, can we have you to ask your question to Xiang?
Hello. I'm a little starstruck and it's amazing to listen to an amazing author who has written a wonderful book. I've just submitted my thesis, PhD thesis for examination, and now I'm writing a paper on ghost cities for a journal article. I'm really inspired by work. I had 2 questions, but considering the time frame, I would ask just one. I'm really struck by, I've actually written it so not to fumble because of your presence. That is, I'm struck by how your name appears reflected across your dual protagonist, because Shang Lu and one protagonist is Shang and then Emperor is Lu. So Shang Lu and Lu Hongdu, this seems to map a diasporic split between the inadequacy of not Chinese enough and the oppressive weight of imperial heritage. By inscribing yourself across both the linguistically incompetent and the tyrannical emperor, are you suggesting that diasporic identity exists precisely in that impossible space, always simultaneously insufficient and overwhelming? So I wanted to know your answer that by fracturing your name, by splitting your name into 2 characters between linguistically bad Chinese and the imperial heritage. So I hope
Yes,
that
absolutely.
makes sense.
The short answer is yes. I think there could be a longer conversation where we had more time. Uh, you discover more about your book when people reflect on it critically. And there was one writer. I'm very interested in critical opinion of the book. I'm not so much interested in media attention of myself. So I will read reviews. And a reviewer said that it was interesting that so many of the characters in the book, particularly the ancient part of the book, had names that were not the same, but quite reflective and refractive. And that is absolutely intentional as well.
And they're your own names. So you have split them into different characters. So I wanted to know the significance. Was it deliberate? Like, are
Yes,
you
absolutely deliberate.
both? Did you split it intentionally between the emperor and the bad Chinese?
Yes, exactly. And I think those of you who are on the call who are more properly Chinese than me can probably confirm this, but the spelling of my name, my actual name, Siang with the S, is actually not um, culturally accurate. Let's put it that way to Chinese culture. And it was actually, I wouldn't say it was an error. It's a Malaysianism, in fact. There are a lot of Malaysian Chinese whose names are Siang, and the character is the same. But because of the quirks of that culture, and again, fractured, viewpoint through fractured viewpoint, it's spelled with an S.
Yeah.
And so it was a really interesting exercise. I wouldn't take this too seriously, but there is some element of truth to this, to sort of investigate what the quote unquote real Siang, spelled with an X, might be like. And so a lot of it was sort of just, again, kind of discovering yourself on the page. You put yourself in these sorts of positions and you end up finding a lot more.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Aisha. It's a great question because that's also one of the questions that I want to ask is names and how you spell the names, the use of your names, the use of names for characters and for places is actually quite a big thing in your book. Thank you so much. And we hope we
Thank
will
you.
continue our conversation in one way or the other sometime in 2026. And hopefully you will be a little less busy.